If you launch a podcast with a bunch of big names, especially celebrities, does that mean the podcast is going to take off? Today, I am auditing a top 200 podcast called Why Not Me with Mike Jackson, and he is interviewing Gabrielle Union. The show is very new, but ranked, and I figured this is a great time to audit an episode like this. Now, if you've not sat through an audit before, number one, I'm not going to just play the whole episode and stop. I've already looked at it, I've already listened to it, and I've picked out very key points for you. And if this is the first time we're meeting, my name is Rich. I own a company called Unfiltered, and we specialize in video podcasts and content creation, and I love to do this. We've had 26 podcasts that we've launched and managed, resulting in over 27 million downloads and all kinds of different amazing byproducts coming from those podcasts. This is something that I love to do. It keeps me on my toes. It helps other people, but most importantly, it helps you if you are looking to start making long form content or if you want to level up your existing podcast. This is the type of thing that's going to help you look at the to-dos and not to-dos. So let's get into the episode.
Have you ever looked at successful people and asked yourself, why not me? My name is Mike Jackson. I'm a Tony and Emmy award-winning producer and co-founder of Get Lifted Film Company. In my business, I've seen how people make it, and trust me, everyone has a different story. Everyone has a different why not me moment. So I started talking to some of these people. First, I started a conversation series at the University of Texas at Austin. That evolved into the main stage at South by Southwest. And now I'll be bringing you conversations with some amazing guests, some of which include my dear friend and producing partner, the incredibly talented John Legend, Candace Parker, who's one of the greatest, if not the greatest WNBA players of all time, the multi-talented Leslie Odom Jr., and actress, activist, and all-around incredible human, Gabrielle Union. Subscribe to Why Not Me wherever you get podcasts, and watch the full videos on YouTube starting June 18th.
So Mike introduces himself and he talks about what industry, he talks about people in the industry, but we don't actually know what industry that is. But we do know he has access to very high level people. Obviously, he's probably high level himself, clearly, if he's going to be having conversations with people like that. So he's having conversations at University of Texas, Austin, then at South by Southwest, now being partnered up with John Legend. Cool, we're going to have conversations, but I'm not totally clear on why not me. And then the guests, I mean, very good trailer in terms of like firepower in terms of the guests, and the actual sound bites from them were fantastic. And I mean, yeah, he's leading with a question, but the video quality's not all that. Definitely. And then there should definitely be a microphone in front of him. Now, before any of that, I don't know what the goal of the podcast is, so this may fall on deaf ears. This may not be a value add, but if you're going to invest the time to schedule conversations, have conversations, interview people that are going to donate their time, then yeah, you probably want to have like good mic, good branding. Now, if he's just starting and this is just a passion project, and that stuff might not mean anything to him. He got ranked super quickly, which is fantastic, but that, along with the other people's video quality or audio quality not being right. I didn't see anyone else with a microphone or anything else. It seemed like they were just using kind of a generic webcam, which look, if they're donating their time like I just mentioned, they may not necessarily care how they show up. However, if you show up and you look tight and your sound is tight, then people who eventually will be on the show will see that in advance and be like, well, I need to make sure I do too. And you can also, of course, always tell the person who you're going to have on, no matter how long you haven't talked to them, hey, if you got a nice camera, can you use that? Because I want to make sure it shows up amazing for you on YouTube. If you have an external microphone, can you use that? The sound quality is going to be so much better for the people who are listening, not just the people who are watching. So that's what I got off the bat, but I definitely don't know what the actual purpose of the show is. If I read about the podcast, and I'm just going to read here really quickly. So the show is categorized as join Tony and Emmy award-winning producer Mike Jackson as he brings you captivating conversations with incredible guests from the world of film, TV, sports, entertainment, and pop culture. Cool, captivating conversations, but what is the goal of the conversation? It may not matter to him, but I do think it matters to the people listening to be like, what are you going to try and get out of each guest besides just captivating stories? So I think that's important, and let's move on to the next section. So let's go ahead and check out the intro for the episode with Gabrielle Union. Here we go.
Welcome back to Why Not Me. I'm Mike Jackson, producer and managing partner of Get Lifted Film Co. Today I spoke with Gabrielle Union. She is one of the most incredible, trailblazing actors of our generation. You know her from Bring It On, from Being Mary Jane, and a litany of other projects.
Okay, Mike is reading, and it's super obvious. I actually listen. So now I have to listen to the episodes in advance. It really helps me gather my thoughts a little bit more so I could be more concise and just clear with the audience, you guys. But he's reading. That's not a huge deal. But when I hear him in the episode, he's just super laid back. So it's like, I would rather you just give an off the cuff intro. But there is a difference. On the audio side, he leads with a fire podcast clip, or a clip from the podcast itself, of Gabrielle saying something. And he doesn't do it here for some reason. So I'm wondering why on YouTube he did an intro, and then on the audio side, he actually led with a clip. So not a huge deal, but yeah, you don't need to read. And again, the quality, we already kind of talked about it.
I love Gabrielle because she's just so cool, so open, and so real. And in this episode, we talk about a lot of personal stuff. We talk about some heartache that she went through. We talk about her career trajectory, and we talk about her dreams and her future. I really hope you enjoy the conversation. Enjoy.
Now let's take a look at their first interaction.
Hey,
Look at you.
how you doing?
Good. You look like a whole different person. You're great.
100 pounds.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's been a journey since I last saw you.
You
So,
looks like time travel. Like you look
yeah,
like season, but like I mean, wow. You look like your skin is glowing.
52, father of 3, 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 9-month-old. I think I told you the other day I've been living in Mexico, so just kind of that reset, rejuvenation, and
So this goes on for a little while, and the one thing to point out is she looks fantastic. She looks fantastic. I get it. She's an actress, but her background looks good. She's clean. She's got good headroom. Versus the host, he has wherever his screen is positioned down. Again, he doesn't have a microphone, at least not that I could see. And I would say his background is kind of, I don't know what, like there's a curtain there to make sure it doesn't get blown out, but eye level. Eye level is buy level. Just think about it at the grocery store. Whenever you want to buy something, the stuff that's up here is probably what catches your attention first. So eye level, that, and you're going to feel more connected with your audience. So that audience is going to be on YouTube. That audience is going to be the guest. So you want to stare at the lens exactly as I am now, no matter how uncomfortable. It's a very, very easy habit to start. That's what I would say there. So good rapport. It's also good that, she kind of went into, how he lost weight, and they're talking a little bit about that. That's completely fine. I get they haven't connected in a while, and it gives you a little bit of insight on him if you've never listened before. We're almost 2 minutes into the podcast, and here's where I think is a very easy mistake to make if you're a new podcaster. And let's go ahead and play it and see if you could pick up on it. We're almost 2 minutes in.
So really quickly, so the whole purpose of this, Why Not Me, and I touched on it before, but it's really about inspiring folks, not just the folks that look like us, but people in general. Like, people see Gabrielle Union and it's like this wonderful, beautiful life that you've created for yourself and that you've earned. But it's like, where did you start? Like, what was your origin story? So a lot of the stuff that we talk about up top is more Omaha, Nebraska stuff and the move to California and things that shaped you as a young woman as you entered this journey. And they're always filled with these why not me moments. When you're constantly pivoting, even when you're the lead, the number one on the call sheet, you have to have a why not me moment to become a producer. You know what I mean? So just giving you context, like why it's called Why Not Me.
Okay, so here's what I think as a podcast host. What he just did happens off camera. So even though it doesn't seem like it took too much time, it took about maybe 45 seconds to a minute, that's the warm-up. Like, if you give people that context before that he's giving her right now, he doesn't have to do it in front of anybody. Just imagine you're in front of an audience. I just think more seasoned podcasters kind of know, like, let's just get into it as soon as we can. So that should happen. That's just called warming up. So you warm up. You could be recording and just say, hey, good to see you again, this and that. Hey, by the way, here's what the show's about. Here's what I'm looking for. And you go from there. But it doesn't have to waste any time, especially on a place like YouTube where, you're battling for average viewer duration. So keep that in mind. Now it's time for his first question. Here we go.
Let's jump in.
All right.
October 29th, Scorpio.
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
a water sign, so, I'm a Pisces, so, we swim together.
I don't know what that was. I don't know what that was, but okay.
Omaha, huh? Like, tell me a little bit about growing up in Omaha. I know you're only there for, I think, the first 8 or 9 years of your life, but tell me, like, mom and dad, siblings, like those early years, what was that environment like?
Yeah. So my family on my mom's side is the largest Black family in the state of Nebraska, one of the largest in the Midwest.
How does one come to that number?
Because we've been documenting
Great
it
how
forever.
question.
So we're coming up, I think, on our 105th.
So the next 10 minutes is a lot about her upbringing, which is always a challenge when you want to start at the beginning with a podcast guest. We're literally talking about when, before she was born, some of the things her parents were doing. And I get the context matters to an extent if you're sticking to the listener promise, which is going to be the theme here. So there's that. And then, we get into her father serving in the military during Vietnam, but not being in Vietnam, him using the GI Bill, then moving from Omaha, Nebraska to the Bay Area, then back to Omaha, and then back to back to the Bay Area where, she lived between the ages of 8 and 18. A little bit about feeling inferior in terms of her beauty and, a couple good things. Now, here's the whole thing. Like, that's about 10 minutes and it's totally fine, but you never know how far they could go in there. And he actually did a good job of letting her speak. And I think he had a couple little tiny questions, but just know if you're going to ask someone to start at the beginning, that is where they're going to start. And that may or may not be good for the audience. So we're now at minute 12:04, and we're going to listen into a question he's got.
Your life, and it's the one thing that's kind of like the crown jewel of your social life, right? Like the boyfriend or the girlfriend, and like that extra validation. And it's like, what the fuck am I supposed to do? Like, how can I fix this problem? But then you realize that you're not the problem, and there really isn't a problem, right? It's really just about getting out into the world and finding your true self as far as like acceptance from that group of people. So I think it's really cool that you kind of lived through that. You're able to carry that. You're able to carry all that like weight with you, and then kind of all of a sudden it's released because you were seen finally. I love that. And it was really interesting to me just because growing up similarly, it killed me, quite frankly. Like,
okay, the reason I wanted to play that is because this is what I usually don't want for a guest. And I don't think hosts usually want this for the guest either, is for them to just kind of, head nod. There's nothing wrong with what he's saying. I need to be very upfront and clear about that. However, it's about a minute and 10-second question/commentary. The good news is after this, he's fantastic with what and how questions, which keep the guests talking. He inserts them perfectly. But this is one of those times where if the whole interview was like this, it'd be a horrible interview. But I get he had some thoughts, something about what she said resonated with him deeply. And he took advantage of that time to not only ask a question, but to give his own insight. And obviously, again, they know each other, so it's fine. But always be cautious of just stretching your question out too long.
To determine who from Northern California will go to state, right?
So right now she's going through all of her athletics background, and she talks about University of Nebraska, Cuesta, UCLA. She talks about track. She talks about softball. She talks about all these things. And again, I'm not saying she's uninteresting. This might be exactly what people want to know, but I can't emphasize enough again. When you're going through someone's story chronologically, it could be really taxing on the listener. Like, dude, get to the point. And I thought something that was slightly ironic here was, why not me? There's a lot about her talking about the self-induced challenges, so to speak, just mindset in terms of why she didn't stand out in terms of maybe beauty or attracting boys, but she was excelling at everything else, and she was saying, I didn't know how to lose. So if someone is listening and looking for inspiration, it might not tie together. There's nothing to take away from her credibility. I'm just saying, if this is supposed to inspire me at this point in the podcast, I'm like, dang, man, she never lost. Like, my life actually sucks right now. And I'm, 20 years past when she was, crushing it. So just keep those kinds of things in mind. I thought that part was ironic. Now we're at a point in the podcast where Mike shifts away from all the background. This is still chronological, so to speak, but it comes to a big event that happened in her life, a traumatic event. And I definitely have some feedback about his approach here. And this is just something from not having podcasted regularly, in my opinion, that he would have picked up on otherwise. So let's help him out. Watch.
And I was working in the kids department anyway, so that was my start. While I was still at UCLA, I started interning at Fontaine, and then I became a client.
So one of the things I really admire about you is your advocacy, and you are really vocal about lots of things. Again, I know that you had an incident, I'll just call it that for now, when you were 19. Mm-hmm. Are you able to talk open to talking about that?
I talk about it. I've been talking about it for 30 years. And that was the last podcast I was just doing. That was what that was about. At 19, like the person I was.
So she went through a traumatic event, but here's a couple things. One, she's like, I've been talking about it for years. I believe she talked about it when she was on my client's podcast as well. So this is not necessarily new. That's good and bad. It's good because she is not caught off guard. Why it might be bad is she might have actually formulated how she tells this story in a very specific way. The other thing is, for Mike, if he did his research or his team did his research, they would have known that it was okay to talk about it and that she had talked about it. And last but not least, at the very beginning of the question, he's like, there was an incident. I'll just call it an incident. Can we talk about it? A really good practice before, again, when you're warming up, okay, and just catching up, you could say, is there anything that's off limits for this podcast in terms of discussion? I don't have anything crazy planned, but I do want to ask about your incident. And she would have said yes. So we could have avoided that kind of part where he's literally asking for permission on the podcast. He would have asked permission prior to the podcast. You could also ask for someone in her situation or any guest, is there anything you want me to be asking about? Now, sometimes the guest is going to really want you to push their agenda. If they got a new book, if they got a new album out, or I don't know, whatever the category is, if they have something they want to sell, you just have to make sure that you don't make the whole podcast about that. So that's a big takeaway there, is just kind of get that out of the way, and you don't have to just fumble around a little bit in that part, knowing if you can or can't talk about it. Hey, real quick, hopefully you've been enjoying this episode. It's fun for me, and I hope it's fun for you and that you're getting the skills. Please make sure, if you are new and starting a podcast, we have an entire playlist on how to start a podcast. And we also have multiple audits that we've done here with people in sales careers. We've done people who are in real estate business, all top 200 podcasts, and we're going to continue to do that. So just go ahead and check those out. And if you really enjoy this, obviously go ahead and give it a like and subscribe. Let's get back to the episode. We're now kind of towards the tail end of her telling her traumatic story of her rape. They announce it, so I'm going to announce it for you as well. But it just makes your heart hurt, right, to hear what happened. But Mike did such a good job. And I usually don't use terms like this, but like he created a really good space. I think he had a couple tiny questions that he asked. He was acknowledging everything which she was saying, and he let her do her thing. And I want to give you an example of a time where, you know, he just did exceptional as a host, in my opinion, especially with such a heavy subject. And also, I just think this is important. So while maybe some of the North Star of the podcast wasn't necessarily hit in terms of why not me, the how we can demonstrate this can turn into advocacy, and how he's giving her a platform. Even for someone like her, you know, she probably has tons of reach, but he's also giving her a platform. And I think it's important because his community, his network, it might hear this, and that's going to spread the word even more. But the advocacy matters. But let's get into his question. That was a long, that what I just did, that's what you don't want to do on a podcast, by the way, just kind of string it out and move all around. But here we go.
Our age, even though they didn't use our names, everyone knew who it was, because they know all the blacks.
And then,
so all of that, like rape shield, like, they knew who I was immediately. And
how was that? How was navigating the community in the immediate aftermath of that, as far as like knowing they know? And was there a level of shame that you felt, or were you
remember, this is 1992. Think of all the things.
So he has a how question. If we've not talked about this before, how and what questions are open-ended. So it doesn't allow them to just be like yes or no, because sometimes they might just be quick to keep it that way. So what or how really forces people to kind of dig a little bit deeper. I don't think she wouldn't have anyway, but it was just a good job of him picking up on like an immediate result of a certain situation after a dramatic situation. So it was a very good question, and I definitely applaud him for that. So here's a key moment for me as a producer. So I'm looking at, we're at minute 32, and she wraps up the story ish. He's ready to move on and make sure he hits some of the points that he wants to for the listeners and for the viewers. So he asks about pivoting away from it, and listen to her answer.
Pivot away from that.
I mean, well, there's a lot to mine with that has shaped everything. But it's like, I want people to know that there is a way forward, and it may be long, and you may have setbacks, and you may go in reverse. Sometimes it feels more than you're going forward. And after the 30th anniversary of that rape was last year, and I was shooting Truth Be Told with Octavia Spencer. And
okay, so no podcast host I've ever audited does anything like this on purpose, but he was trying to pivot away from it. And maybe it got too heavy for him. Maybe it's hard to relate. Maybe he wasn't sure if the listeners would still be tuned in after hearing that, or whatever it is. But he was ready to kind of make a sharp turn for a pivot. And she's like, this has shaped everything. So with the theme of the show, Why Not Me? if she's like, no, this shaped everything, and she's kind of saying like, no, we don't have to pivot, like I got more, you have to be able to pick up on those cues and get there. This again is back to the whole chronological part earlier. Like if we didn't spend so much time on growing up and some of these other things, like maybe we would have had a substantial amount of time where she could talk about how she may have developed a why not me attitude. She was someone who had been incredibly successful, had a super traumatic event happen to her. But then, like, what happens? What happens afterwards? Yes, of course, she talks about the counseling and some of these other things. But here she's volunteering to talk about how it shaped everything. You got to dig into that. You don't need to pivot away. So we're going to fast forward a little bit, but she essentially gets into her modeling and acting career kind of taking off simultaneously, some of the big breaks she had in some of the movies. And this is just one of those things where, to me, there was a bunch of places where he could have dug in a little bit, but maybe he was being sensitive to time. I mean, she is a celebrity, so maybe she's extremely limited for time. But, you know, during the course of that, it's like, why not me? There's just a lot of moments where I believe, to just be consistent with the theme of the show, there's parts that he could have dug into. But right now we'll get into a part, at least a very cool part to me, where she kind of got a big break. Let's check it out.
Well, Bay's already signed off. I'm assuming Will or whoever the cast, like Michael, Will and Martin, I guess, had to sign off. But I had to meet Jerry. And Jerry was like, are you ready for what this is going to do in your life?
Were you?
I don't even know what that
Could
means.
you even comprehend
I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means. I know Bring It On gave me name face recognition. And then Cradle to the Grave, you know, I was good in every hood, but like, I don't know what this shit, I don't know what a movie with Will Smith is at the height of his Will Smithness. Martin at the height of his Martinness. I don't know what that is. And that first global press tour, that was, and it's never been the same.
I think that's super cool. And we go on and it's just kind of a continuation. So it's almost like just a biographical show. Now, the show is actually titled, this episode, Finding Strength Through Trauma. And the thing is, when I look back at kind of my timestamps here, the event, the traumatic event, is about 8 to 9 minutes covered. So I'm not sure that's what the whole podcast episode is about. So I would definitely consider a title that is very accurate. I'm not saying she hasn't found strength through trauma or that isn't in this episode, but is it what the entire episode is about? Probably not. So we're going to play a clip and you're going to see how he kind of signals that the show is coming to a close, which I don't think is a good idea.
I think that's really dope. At the end of these things, I like to ask a bunch of fun questions. So I'm going to jump in. So I'm 18 years older than my wife.
Okay. Yeah.
And you're older than your spouse.
Yes.
What is it that you know, being the elder in the relationship, what is it you think you bring to the table? What's that like defining thing, being the elder person in the relationship, that makes it uniquely yours?
And I don't, it's what I think. This is what I think. You asked my husband's
Your opinion.
I have foresight.
So when you want to wrap up with something fun, like these questions, and he's, you know, I just showed you a bunch, but there's other ones he asked, like, if you could be anyone at any age, any time period, what's your favorite curse word? You know, I always like to ask myself, especially for a podcast like this with very high level guests, is like, do you want the listeners to just learn from them or just learn about them? And to me, it's kind of unclear. You could say it's a blend of both, but if you lean one way or the other, it's probably a little bit better just for the show flow. So good answers there that she gave. And, you know, I just always am weary of asking some of those questions that might catch people off guard, because then they're just like, and then they got to kind of think while on camera. And if you're not going to edit it out, then okay. But that's basically it for the podcast. Now let's get into some of the things surrounding the podcast and the marketability of the podcast. So we can see he's got 59 subscribers, so relatively small channel, very, very new channel. 233 views on this. Gabrielle Union joined the podcast to talk about her early days playing soccer, etc. So it's not a compelling short description if I want to look at it. And then there's one timestamp. You have 00 for the intro and then 44 seconds, Gabrielle Union. So yeah, I mean, there should be timestamps throughout the whole thing for listener convenience. I actually never checked on Spotify if they had any either. I'm looking on another screen and it does not. There's only one clickable thing on Spotify, and it is Megaphone FM ad choices, which probably means they're using Megaphone, which I hate. It's a Spotify company, but they're not that great. So that's what I noticed about that. There's really no calls to action, no find her here, support her here, find him here, support him here. There's none of that. There's not links to his website or Instagram, and you want to do that for the guest. And then you want to put things like, if you liked this episode, check out my episode with Candace Parker. So everything that you could possibly put in the short description, you should. So they are not searchable on view stats for whatever reason. Maybe it's because it's a new channel, but that's okay. So I cannot see how the performance is per se, but given the amount of subscribers he has, let's see here. I'm just looking on another screen. 86 views, 286 views, 129 views. 1.5K views for Candace Parker. So that's good. That's good generally. Anytime you're getting more views than you have subs or subscribers is a fantastic thing. Again, I mean, these are kind of small numbers, but considering his network, who knows, this could be a lot more. Again, I want to make sure that people are actually giving you the ability to find you, access you in multiple points, so that way you know about the podcast. So let's move on to Instagram. It took me a while to find him, but here's 22,000 followers. And if you click this link about why not me, it actually takes you here, which is good. This is something that Chartable offers. Chartable is a third-party independent ranking. That's where you could get your global ranks, your Apple ranks, your Spotify ranks, all that kind of stuff. But this is good because this link that they're able to provide allows you to choose where you want to listen to your platform. It's funny though, because Google Podcast doesn't exist, but that's still here. But if you want to have a choice, then that's good to have there. Gives you a short synopsis. Back to the actual podcast page. So this seems like a personal page and a family page, but also he's got the podcast on here. Got some really good momentum on some of these podcast clips. 72K, 181K. I'm assuming that, he's collaborating with them. So that's fantastic. Let's see if she has it on hers. Yep. So, that's a huge help. So super smart, man. Like, you're going to crush in that manner. So I think very good job there. When we go to Get Lifted Film Company, which is his company, I see he collabed there as well. So very, very smart way to leverage the platforms you already have to promote the podcast, because you need to do that. Okay, let's check out Chartable. So Chartable, again, is where I'm looking, where I even find the podcast that I want to audit, because they're usually in the top 200. So this big dip here is not abnormal. There's a lot of buzz around launches, and I'm sure they did a pretty good job of doing that, which is why it started basically at 65 in terms of careers. So is this a careers podcast? Yeah, I guess I would say, considering everyone that he's had on so far. And this is kind of normal. This is slightly interesting. It was getting close to holiday weekend, but that's not necessarily normal. Anytime you post, you should probably see a peak, and you really know if you're doing a good job if the peaks start to get higher and the lows start to get lower. So as of just a couple days ago, as I record this, he's ranked 221. Now I'm going to go back to it, but here's something I wanted to show you. And when I type in why not me, you see a bunch of these. And that's also why I had a hard time finding him on Instagram, because when I went to try and type it in, you could see there's a lot of them. So this is just, if you're newer, I think it's really important to consider if you're going to have difficulty getting a handle that's going to be for the podcast itself. If you want to have a podcast Instagram page, it might be hard, and you might have to default to your personal page, which is not always what you want to do. So let's go ahead and click back on it. So here we are. So 9 ratings, 5 stars. Let's see, waiting for 20 years. So I think only 1 written review. He's out of, he's not ranked right now as of the time of this filming. But yeah, so not a ton there. Let's move on to LinkedIn. Went to LinkedIn, and he doesn't have a banner. There's no logos for any of this. So this just happens to be a collateral thing I'm looking at. So could LinkedIn be better? Absolutely. He hasn't actually ever posted anything, but if you want traction for your podcast or anything, this is a great place to do it as well. There's a lot of people who would be very interested, especially in a podcast that falls under careers on LinkedIn. So Mike, if you're watching this, definitely get on LinkedIn. Don't sleep on it. It is a great platform. And with all the video content you have that could come from a video podcast, I think that would be a very good place to be. And now we are going to go to Facebook. I couldn't find anything when I was looking for Mike specifically for as far as a page, but I saw a few things of him and his partner, John Legend, a business partner. And then I went to their actual Get Lifted film company, where I was just like, okay, wait a second. Like, they could be posting stuff here, but they haven't posted anywhere since December 11th, 2021, where they absolutely, again, Reels are big. So if you're using Reels on Facebook, that could really do some great work for you and just get the word out about some of the podcast episodes that you have. So I finally found Mike's Facebook page. He's got 2.8K friends, so this is just a regular account. But here's where the podcast clips are going, and they could be going on the Get Lifted page, or they could be going on the, if they had a podcast page for that looks like ludicrous. Anyway, so just a call out there. You're not probably going to get the visibility on a personal page than you would on maybe a branded page for the podcast. Couldn't find anything on TikTok, and I don't really care about TikTok. I'm not sure he does either, but not a huge deal there. And the very last thing is I just obviously typed in Mike Jackson just to see what kind of popped up. And you got the Instagram page that I found. You got the LinkedIn page, a Wikipedia, but there's not necessarily a website. So in this case, again, anything you could get to help you get more subscribers, to get more visibility, to get more listeners, to get more anything is something I would definitely want to do. So probably, either a personal website, mikejackson.io, or whynotme.io, whatever it is, that's a good place to house a podcast as well. So you're giving people a lot of places to not only catch on the short form that's going to maybe lead them to the long form on YouTube or on a podcast playing platform, but there's a place that kind of houses it all if anyone just decides tonight, type in your name. Mike Jackson, obviously a freaking super ridiculously common name, but if you want to stand out and you want to provide value and you want this podcast to do certain things, then you got to be promoting it everywhere you possibly can. So overall, Mike seems like a solid dude, and I wish him the absolute best in kind of just getting some of that low-hanging fruit together and then just continuing on with these interviews. It's clear this guy loves to have conversations, and I can relate to that 1,000,000%. So now, the big takeaway for you as a viewer or listener is these two things, in my opinion. The podcast, I have no idea how many downloads it's doing or anything like that, and I don't think it's the big names that are the reason he ranked. You rank if you get people subscribing. So their launch strategy was probably very good, but people, when they're subscribing, is what is actually going to get you ranked, not just downloads. Ratings and reviews have nothing to do with it. So just keep that in mind. The second thing is we literally went from like almost pre-birth essentially to present in the span of an hour. And just always keep in mind that that's challenging, man. That's challenging for someone to go through. It's challenging for the listener. And then you as a host, I mean, you might feel like you don't want to deviate because you're going to mess up the timeline as if you were Loki in, Marvel Cinematic Universe or something like that. I would just be super intentional going forward if I were Mike, in terms of what exactly do I want to get from the guest and what is that supposed to do for the listener. If it's just entertainment and they just want to get, and he wants the people to just get to know some of these famous people or amazing guests, cool. Or is it going to be, here's what I want a listener to take away and be able to do after the episode is over? And I think that should be the focus. All the other little things are so easy to kind of fix, so to speak. So Mike, if you ever see this, fantastic job. Keep up the great work, and we'll see you all next week.